Welcome to On the Go with AAUW, the American Association of University Women. I'm your host, Jennifer Disano, Executive Director of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at George Mason University. And today we're going to be discussing the latest AAUW report, Barriers and Bias, the Status of Women in Leadership. With me today is Dr. Catherine Hill, VP for Research at the American Association of University Women. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And Katie Benson. Katie is a Research Associate at AAUW and also helped to write the report. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. Catherine, how long have you been with AAUW?
I have been with AAUW for about a decade. And I'm very proud of that service, and I have enjoyed it a great deal. I have one of the best jobs at AAUW, which is looking at the information that we need to have so that we are doing the research that are going to really help women advocate for the issues that are before us.
And Katie, how long have you been working with AAUW, and what brought you to work for AAUW?
Well, I've been with the organization for almost 4 years now, which is pretty hard to believe, and it's just been quite a wonderful experience. My background is actually in social work, and I look at macro social work perspectives, and so I knew I loved research pretty early on, and so the perfect thing about this job is that it combines my passion of research and with feminist issues. Really
wonderful. And the report is called Barriers and Bias, and it addresses the status of women in leadership. And it offers actionable guidance for changing perspectives and policies and practices within organizations where women learn and work and are active in our communities. Women have made impressive gains over the last 50 years. We're earning more degrees than ever before.
That's right.
We're in the workplace actively engaging and have full careers. But we're not seeing the leadership positions being filled by women. Those are still being filled by men. And so we see that happening in corporate America. We see it in our own Congress. We see it at universities. The report points out that this is considered a gender leadership gap, and that is the basis of your latest report. Why does this gap exist, and why is it so important for women to start acquiring more leadership roles?
Well, I'll start with what is the leadership gap, and that is there's a really sizable difference between men and women at the highest levels, and it is a bit of a surprise because if we look at women in the workforce overall, looking at women in education, we see women have been very successful in both spheres, and yet when you get to leadership at the very top, we're in much smaller numbers. Actually, Katie, do you want to share some of the numbers we found?
Sure. So one of the great things about this report is we looked at 3 different sectors, different industries. We looked at academia, business, and politics. And you know, the numbers are stark. We knew that there was a leadership gap. We just had no idea how big the gap was. So for example, of our 50 governors, only 6 of them are women, and only 2 of them are women of color. So how representative of it is that of our country?
So you're finding in academia, for example, at universities, you're going to have women working, or let's not talk about universities, let's talk about just, say, education,
right,
K through 12, where you're going to have, a lot of the employees are going to be women,
right,
female teachers.
That's right, about 75% of public school teachers are women. But as you were alluding to, about 20%
of the superintendents.
That's exactly right. And so that's a very stark difference. We know women can be great teachers. That's not controversial. And yet, when we get to the very highest levels in the education profession, we still see that women are outnumbered.
And that must correlate to, you know, future leaders, women who may be potential leaders, not necessarily having the role models within where their workplace is, and then those teachers teaching their students, and that not actually being in the higher leadership positions. It must be confusing to the up and coming leaders, the females that are not really getting those role models.
One of the things that we found in this report is that while there's some overt barriers that women still face, one of the major barriers is bias, and specifically what we call implicit bias, which is the kind of bias that is sort of in the back of your mind. You may not realize you even have that, and yet it's affecting your decision making. In fact, it's perhaps more important because you don't know about it, so you can't adjust for it, where with overt biases, you can at least recognize them and grapple with them.
So we're all internalizing our experiences and coming up with some psychology of what we believe to be true internally, and not explicitly necessarily, but some things we're telling ourselves inside implicitly affecting how we perceive what's going on out in the world, and that can play into our actions and how we perceive others. So women are still trailing in the top of academia. We're seeing that they're underrepresented as faculty too at universities. So that correlates to fewer deans and directors and provosts and administrators. It's a similar situation.
It's a similar situation. What we are seeing is that women are teachers in universities, and we're seeing that women are, even getting to the assistant professor levels, but that overall they're the teachers, but they're not at the very top level, being the full professors or being the presidents and at the very top of the university power structure. And
carrying on with that theme of fewer women in power positions, recently in Washington, D.C., we had the White House and several other sponsors put on the Leadership Women's Summit, United State of Women.
Yes.
And along with many other topics regarding women in leadership, civic engagement and political positions were also part of the session topics. We know women are active at the local level, pretty active in terms of politics and getting into engaging with advocacy. But when it gets to the state and national level, so senators, governors, and even presidents, we're not seeing the participation there either.
In the same
in
levels.
Leadership.
That's right. No, we still see a very large gap. So women are about 1 in 5 of the representatives in Congress. You mentioned earlier with the governors, and in state legislators, we see the same kind of pattern. So I think we see sort of across the board that we're not seeing the representation that we'd like to see at the level of in politics. And I think we do actually have a program. I think we might want to mention that here about Elect Her.
We can go ahead and talk about that. Sure, AAUW has a lot of great programs to encourage women's leadership, and one specifically we like to talk about when it comes to politics is called Elect Her, and it's a workshop in which young college women learn the skills and are encouraged to go for a political campaign on their local campus or even beyond. And in 2015, about 1,000 women took the workshop, and of those women, 76% of them won their campaigns on their campuses.
That's fantastic. Well, I think you have to begin somewhere, and if you're on a college campus, why not? And get engaged. And these wonderful programs that AAUW sponsors are great vehicles for that to happen. AAUW recently hosted a forum regarding the latest Barriers and Bias report, and that forum was broadcast, streamed out to the public, and Cokie Roberts was the moderator for that. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how this wonderful report has been introduced to the community?
Absolutely. We had the event at the museum, which is a wonderful venue here in Washington, D.C., and we had a fairly large audience, and we have seen the report already make some real waves. We've gotten on PBS, on To the Contrary, we've been on the Washington Post and a number of other magazines and newspapers. So we are seeing the conversation taking place going forward, in part because we're taking a little bit of a different tact. There's a lot of research out there about leadership. We found this as we began doing our literature review, that this is an exhausting field. It's exhaustive, and exhausting, but we really did. I think we summarized a lot of different research and brought it into one place, and we took the focus away from just the individuals. And we hear so much about women stepping up and leaning in and speaking out. that's all fine, but we want to look at, turn that camera lens around and say, what can we do? What are the barriers and biases that women are facing as they aspire to leadership positions?
So we're seeing the underrepresentation of women, and we're trying to explore and explain that. You're also looking at it through the report lens of why are men overrepresented in leadership roles, and you talk about a few examples of that in the report. The pipeline problem, sexual discrimination, caregiving and women's choices, and the lack of effective networks and mentors. Can we expand on some of that?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I think one thing that explains, the overrepresentation of men in leadership fields is that historically leadership has been held in a masculine position. Women are half of the college graduates and over half the college graduates, and they're half of the workforce now. So the idea that it's a pipeline problem and that the women aren't there just is false. There are women, they're ready to take those positions on, but there's still something that's keeping them from reaching that level. Mm-hmm. And then as far as, sexual discrimination is concerned, like we were talking about with biases, there's explicit and implicit, and so, there are hiring practices that are discriminatory, we can, talk about the wage gap and how that fits into this, but then there's also, less subtle ways, like a hostile work environment and what that does for encouraging women to persist and to move upward in an industry.
Mm-hmm. And looking at it, I think that's all right. But looking at it also from the perspective of men, a lot of men have been encouraged and face stereotypes about what they're supposed to do, what are masculine roles that are acceptable. So when men stay home with their kids, they can face a certain amount of prejudice as a result. When my brother-in-law actually spent some time being the primary parent, and I think it was, he had a hard time with people simply asking him, well, what are you doing? And when he explained that he was at home with the kids, they just corrected him and said, well, what are you really doing?
Right, right. We certainly haven't made huge strides culturally in overcoming our stereotypes of men and women. And we did talk a little bit about this last year when, Catherine, when you were visiting with me and we talked about the Solving the Equation report from 2015. We talked about stereotype threat, and this is another variation of stereotype where an individual, because they're told or they get the impression they can't do something, then they don't do it because it's because they're, that's for girls or that's for boys and that type of thing. Staying home with the kids, that's for girls. And that can really impact decisions that might be best for the family or best for the individual. And you cover a bit of stereotype in this new report, Barriers and Bias, where you talk about how that psychology that one can develop, how they perceive themselves and how they perceive others with regard to leadership. Where for example, a woman who you would think would be okay with another woman leader might actually internalize having a woman leader as not something that they would feel comfortable with, or that they would think should happen in a natural way. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I'll start, and Katie, you can jump in. I think one of the things that we have found is that both women and men are susceptible to these stereotypes and these biases. And what we see is that women can be biased against other women. People of color can be biased against people of color. So, and we also can bring those biases and stereotypes into our own perspectives of ourselves. So we're saying, for example, so many women feel like, well, I can't be an engineer. I couldn't possibly have those skills. And yet, I always tell this story. I actually was at one of our camps, and a number of girls were talking to me about various things. And I said to them, well, have any of you thought of becoming an engineer? And they all said, no, we don't want to be an engineer. And I said, okay, do any of you know what an engineer does? And they're all like, no. So I said, how do you know you can't do it? So I think that we come with preconceptions about fields, of things we can do, and of ourselves that are culturally created, and we need to be able to address and face those and challenge them.
Absolutely, but not everyone is a born leader. you know, I mean, often that you have to have certain characteristics that are going to help you self-identify as a leader. You might have certain traits. You might have charisma. You might have a comfort level with leading people. Do women and men have different approaches to leadership? And are there particular methods or positional leadership that translate for where you're going to see more or less women taking on roles?
Mm-hmm. So should I start?
Yes, please.
Okay, sure. You know, that was a really interesting point in the literature. There's a lot of people who argue that men and women do lead differently, in particular that women tend to lead from a circle and create networks of power, and that men tend to be more hierarchical. And that being said, there certainly are men who have a style that's more similar to women, and women who have a style that's similar to men. So they may be tendencies, but we're not going to say for sure that, you know, men and women differ always and in every case.
Sure. Right. Mm-hmm. I think that the report highlighted transactional or inspirational leadership as a method for getting people to come together and being able to lead a group in that manner, where you're going to see men also being transformational leaders, but perhaps also taking this other hierarchical style that they, you know, I'm the leader.
Yeah, I think that the best leaders in the studies we looked at were those that do inspire the people around them, both through their actions and their words, and you know, that is really the model of leadership. And in fact, you know, if you don't have followers, you're not really a leader. So it's important that the followers play an important role in selecting and maintaining who is in these leadership positions.
Yeah, leadership is hard to really define because leaders can be at any part of the organization. You can have a leader who might not be the CEO. You know, it doesn't you don't have to necessarily be the height of the company to be a leader. You could be a worker on the ground, you know, helping a team to meld and focus on the goal. But in this report, you had to, in your research study, you had to focus in on certain criteria to define a leader, and I think you chose positional leaders like executives and so forth, in order to really get some meat to put into the research. Now, can you explain a little bit about how you arrived, how that report was designed?
Yeah, I think we began by looking at this question of defining leadership. And of course, there have been women leaders throughout history, right? If you think of the Queens of England or the pharaohs, some of the pharaohs back in Egypt. So there have been women leaders throughout history. But what we wanted to look at is those leaders that have the most immediate power in terms of making a difference, and also who are recognized as being the leaders. Because those, as we've been talking a lot about stereotypes and bias, well, we have stereotypes and bias about leadership and about leaders. And if we're going to change those stereotypes, we need to change the reality. It's sort of it goes both directions, right? We need a new reality to get the stereotypes. The stereotypes reflect reality, so we need to work on both ends. But I think that part of what we need to see is different ways of thinking about leaders. AAUW is an organization that has been about leaders from its inception, and I hope we help lots and lots of women to become leaders and to develop their leadership skills. And it's a great way to start exploring new ways that you can be a leader. I think all of our members, I hope, will take this report and think about their own lives and their own work and think about pushing themselves.
Yeah, just being aware also that there are internal conflicts going on in all of us, and being able to resolve those. And I think that one of the tests that you recommend is the implicit association test through Harvard, a collaborative effort that AAUW has put together. Can you talk a little bit about that test and how people might be able to assess their bias?
Yes, yes, absolutely. You want to start?
Sure. So AAUW, in conjunction with the release of this report in March, we also released an implicit association test, or an IAT, on gender and leadership, and we did that with Harvard's Project Implicit. And basically, what it does is it's a computer test. It takes about 10 minutes. It's free and it's confidential. And what it does is assess those implicit biases that we talked about earlier. And the purpose of the test is to have you kind of learn a little bit about yourself and how your unconscious biases might be affecting your behavior and your actions and your decision-making skills. So, you know, we're very proud of the test, and we've seen it to be very successful so far. And that's something we would strongly encourage other people to do.
It has huge value. I took the test myself, and I think it's telling. And it has huge value in how you are going to be more thoughtful in your first impulse, and to rethink, you know, whether your biases are speaking or whether you're actually speaking from what you actually want to do. And it helps us all when we can honestly assess how we're thinking and how we're behaving and how what we're doing and saying is impacting others.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. No, and I just want to add that I think that implicit bias comes into play especially when we're under pressure, when we're doing things quickly, and you know, when we're trying to act quickly. So if you take the test more quickly, you're more likely to find that you have some form of association and bias. So this is when to catch yourself in your real life to say, when I'm under pressure, when I'm working quickly, I need to be aware. I need to be aware of these biases.
Yeah, absolutely. And AAUW is doing a lot to help close the leadership gap for women, and there are certain programs. I think you mentioned Elect Her.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about the scholarship grants and Start Smart and other initiatives that AAUW's got going?
Absolutely, yes. You know, the backbone, the foundation of AAUW is empowering women and girls, and so we have developed all of these programs in hopes of helping lift women up into these leadership roles if that's where they want to go, and we hope that they do, and we want to support them every step of the way. So, you know, as I mentioned earlier, Elect Her helps women go into political office. Another program that we have is an annual conference, the National Conference for College Women Student Leaders, or NCWSL, as we like to call it, which brings about 1,000 young women student leaders from around the country to Maryland, to the University of Maryland here locally, and where they spend 2 days talking about workshops and getting skills building training and networking. And the hope with our conference is that these women will feel empowered, and they will take all that they learned either back to their campus, or if they're graduates, that, you know, they'll go on and take those to the next path after graduation.
That's really fantastic, and that's why, you know, being a member of AAUW is, do your part by getting online and signing up and becoming a member and helping to get these programs in place and supported. So when you were writing the report, were there any gems that just kind of shocked you, or what were some things that you were somewhat surprised by as you were doing your research?
One of the things that I noticed in the work we were doing is that while there's a lot written about leadership and women in leadership overall, there's not as much done about women of color, different groups of women, and looking at women in these different situations. And overall, we believe that the experience of leadership and the challenges facing women are quite different when we're looking at women of different ethnicities and races, and so we recommend that we see more research done that really takes into account all of these differences among women.
And how can viewers get a copy of the report?
There are a couple of different ways that we can get the report to you. One is that if you go to our website, www.aauw.org, you can download a free copy of the PDF. Also on the website, there's our PowerPoint presentation where you can get some of the graphics that you've seen today and give this presentation in your community, it is scripted, and so you can be the expert and share this in your networks. And there's also a one-page document that kind of gives the highlights of this research report. So those are some electronic ways you can get this information. If you would like a physical copy of the research report, you can go to Shop AAUW, and the link is on AAUW's website, and you can order physical copies through them.
That's terrific. So you can take that PowerPoint into your community, and you can give a presentation to your friends or your colleagues at work or students in a classroom, and share this wonderful sharing documents, which AAUW likes to call them. So you can just take that material, it's already prepared for you, and you just download it on the website. AAUW also puts out several other reports that you have authored, and those are also available online?
Absolutely. All of our research reports are available online for free. And we have hard copies again at the Shop AAUW, because the hard copies are nice too. They have color, they have the graphics, but we do have it all online. We have the one-pagers. We have a lot of different ways to use this material. So we have things you can bring to your, one thing I always like people to take this information to your state legislators, take it to your mayors, your governors, we take it to Congress as part of our lobby corps. Every time we have a new report, our lobby corps goes to Washington and shares it with Congress and their representatives.
That's fantastic. I mean, you don't have to really do the research yourself. AAUW has done it for you through your hard work and efforts.
Right.
And getting students involved. Membership for AAUW is free for students, so you can go online and get signed up in that manner. What else is coming up really quickly? We have a few seconds.
Well, I just wanted to add to that when our members take the research reports out to the public and out to their politicians in their communities, it gives us so much more power. We're taken seriously because we are a membership organization that many women care about and many men care about. So we really want to make sure that this information gets used. And we are creating some new reports right now as we speak, as soon as we get back to the office, and we'll be happy to share those with you when they come.
Well, we'll be looking forward to hearing about it next time. And thank you so much, Catherine.
Thank you.
Thank you for visiting. And Katie, it's been a pleasure. I'm Jennifer Disano. This has been On the Go with AAUW. Thanks for joining us.